Hi, my name is Nicole Anderson and you're watching my Stitches in Time video. I'm going to teach you how to do a few different macrame knots using a variety of cords, and then also build upon our previous ladder bracelet video and incorporate it into this wonderfully eclectic wrap bracelet. You start with your materials, and you want to palette your beads, obviously, before you start, and I went for a sort of fall Victorian feel, so I decided to go with the warmer tones with magentas and some powdered almond Swarovski pearls, some gold-filled beads. I have 2mm and 4mm, and then also some of our quartz crystal cubes. These work really well in a ladder bracelet because they really lock into each other. And then we will be using jump rings to cover some of our transition areas. And then also I'm using our thick Ceylon cord, and I selected these colors that I felt worked pretty harmoniously with my color palette. I got some neutrals, and then I picked up the highlight tones from the maroon pearls. And then for your tools, you'll need, if you're using jump rings, you'll need your bent chain nose and chain nose pliers, some flush cutters, very sharp cutters to cut your thread, our perfect end thread burner, which is a great tool, and it makes knotting off ends and adding and dropping threads a breeze. And then also some beeswax for when you're doing the ladder stitch. This is very helpful for making kind of false needles without having to use regular needles. And that's what it looks like, all fresh and new. And then you'll also need Scotch tape just for one of the steps. So you want to start by taking 4-yard lengths of 3 of your different colors. So I'm going to start with these 3, and then your 4th one will come into play later. And I'm going to start with the spiral knot, and then transition into the square knot, and then show you how to add beads to your square knot. My piece of leather strapped to my board, and if the way you set this up will depend on the total length of the bracelet you're going to make. I'm making mine for a 7 to a 7.5 inch wrist, so I'm going to need 35 inches of cord for it to wrap 5 times. And since I'm using such a long piece of leather, I just used the continuous piece and just strapped it to my button. If you're making a shorter bracelet and you don't want to waste all that leather, then if you refer to our ladder bracelet video, it will show you how to use a scrap piece of cord to strap your bracelet down. Okay, so you're going to start by taking your 3 4-yard lengths of different colors and bringing it underneath, and then double check to make sure that it's centered more or less. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then you're going to make your first stitch. So keeping your threads on either side, you're going to take your left end, bring it across and underneath the right, like so. And then you're going to take your right grouping and bring it underneath and through. So I'm going underneath the leather and through the cue that you just made, and bringing it through and then pulling it tight. And you're going to do the same direction each time. So again, I have my 2 groupings on either side. You bring your left across the leather and underneath your right hand grouping, and then you take your right hand grouping, and you see how it forms a cross right here, or a T plus sign. You're going to bring it through the plus sign and out the loop, and then pull it taut. Make sure that you don't have any looping out, because that will affect the way your ladder forms, and it might move up and down a little bit as you start, but the farther down you go, it'll get locked in place and it'll stop moving around. So left over the leather, under the right, and then bring the right through the plus sign and out the Q. Tight. And since you're using 3, do just stop and take the time to tighten all of your threads, otherwise it will be lumpy. And you can see it's already starting to spiral. Out and over. And then your cords are going to end up flipping around because you're making a spiral, and you just want to keep making the knot on the same side. So eventually it's going to flip around entirely. So right here you can see that the twist is just bringing these cords around the other side, so you just want to go with it, accommodate for your spiral, and keep going on the same side. Don't switch sides, otherwise you're going to reverse your spiral and it will look funny. And so, oops. When in doubt, always reverse. It's easier to undo it on the spot than to realize that you've made a mistake when you're 4 stitches down. Now we finished the spiral section, we're going to move on to the next section, which will look like this, but in your other color palette. And so you're going to apply some of the same concepts, but a little bit modified. And to prepare for this, you're going to choose one color, so I chose the rust on this one. And then on both sides, you're going to pre-string the beads that you want to be alternating on either side, on both sides. So you're going to have this, and then just knot it at the very end so that they don't slip off while you're doing your other knotting, because your strings go flying. And so I'm going to start, bring those down. I'm going to start with the rust on the left, and you're going to capture all of the threads just with the one, and I'm going to start with a Q. So bring it over, make your Q, bring it around everything, and then pull it up, and then make sure that these extra tails up here are down in there and that they don't have any shoulders sticking out, because that won't be too pretty when you're finally done. So you make one Q, and then you're going to make another Q with the same string going around, and this will really hold everything in place now. Then for your next step, you're going to slide your first bead in right there, and you're going to take this tail and set it to the side so that you don't accidentally capture it. Then the next color I'm going to use is the pink. So just try to pull it up so that you don't have anything overlapping it on the side. And now I'm going to make a P and capture everything except for this tail here. So make a P this way, bring the tail underneath everything and through the loop of the P. And then try to make sure that your cords stay on their right sides while you're tightening. Otherwise it'll start to look a little funky and it won't lay right. And when you start this section, you want to make sure that it's continuous with the flat section of your twist, and that you don't start when your twist is up here. Otherwise it's not going to lay flat against your wrist. So it just extends down so it continues to lay with your leather. So I did one P there, then I'm going to do a second, Make sure to push it up so that it's side by side, tightly in there. And then now you're going to bring the string with the bead down. And you're going to take the rust color from the opposite side. And make 2 more knots in the P position. So 1. And when you first snug it up, just be careful, take your time and make sure everything's laying in the right place. And then once more. So now you have 2 of those. And then you're going to take a bead from the right side, slide it up, lift it to the side so that you don't accidentally capture it. And this time I'm going to use the burgundy from the opposite side and capture the remaining tails, making Q's. Okay, so now I have my maroon or my burgundy section finished, so I'm going to come in and capture all of the tails, including the bead side with the rest side on the left. So now I'm going to make 2 more Q's. And then make sure all of your tails are flat so that you don't have too many lumps. And then make another Q notch. And sometimes it's easier to go and clean things up more after you've made your second knot. And then on that same side, you're going to slide another bead up so it sits on the opposite side. Lift that, and since I just did the burgundy before, now I'm going to switch back to the pink from the right side. So now I'm going to make 2 knots in the P position. Leave the bead and bring this tail down, and then make 2 knots in the P position with the rest tail. And so you can start to see your pattern building. And it's a little confusing to get the pattern at first, but once you have it, it's very rhythmic and you just go. And it's done before you know it. So and then another knot in the P position. You're going to slide your bead up. And now it's burgundy's turn again. So leave that to the side. And then you're going to do 2 burgundies in the Q position. And you just keep going until you reach your desired length. So now that I've completed that section, I'm going to move on to the square knot portion. And so it's a lot like the spiral knot. So I'm going to start with a Q knot, make that. And I'm going to do a knot in the P position, like so. And then just keep alternating back and forth. Do a knot in the Q position, and then the P position, until you've reached your desired length for that section. So now I've completed the square knot portion of my bracelet, I'm going to move on to my herringbone ladder portion of my bracelet. And if you need some background on the ladder bracelet, you can watch our YouTube video and click on the link to see it. And make sure that you watch that video before doing this part, because you'll need that basic foundation before you begin with this next part. And as you can see, I've kind of run out of cord, and not to mention I just want to change up the palette a little bit. So I'm going to show you how to drop these cords and add some fresh ones. So I will be adding these three colors. The only one that's changed is the fuchsia. I substituted that for the pink, but I kept the two neutrals, so I'm basically switching out the highlights. You don't want it to be too bright and distracting, so I just try to stick with one highlight color. And then I also added in a 3-yard length of the tough cord in number 1 brown. And it's 3-yard lengths of each one this time, because you're just going to be doing a small section, and then the section after that is the ladder portion, and it doesn't involve any of the seam-on anymore after that, so you can work with shorter lengths. And you will add the cords in by starting on your last knot, and you can add the cords in by taking all 4, feeding them through the legs so that they are centered, more or less, like so. And then you're going to want to bring this set through, so it's going through the legs of the leather, and then it's got the 2 sections of old cord sticking out either side of the U. So at this point, you're going to tie another square knot on top of it to lock them in place. Like so. And then you're going to take another piece of your cord. I'm going to go with the piece of burgundy, but you can do whatever color silk wrap you want. And if you need a refresher on silk wrapping, we have a video on that as well. It's very thorough, and it's silk wrapping kimono cord. You can click on the link to watch that one as well. And so you just want to silk wrap all of these in place. And you don't want to do a really long wrap. It needs to be, you know, ½ an inch or under, but it's just to get all these secure so that you can start working with your new ones and cut off your old ones. And so now you're left with a mess of cords. So the first ones I cut off are the ones for the silk wrap. Using a very sharp pair of cutters, make sure not to cut your wrap. And then just take the time and really figure out which cords are for what. And so as you start separating them out, just carefully cut them one by one. Like I said, take your time, you don't want to cut the wrong cord. So now I have my silk wrap in place, and I've carefully trimmed off all the extra tails, and you may have some little ones sticking out, but this is where your sliders come into place. And you can use a big hole bead. I'm choosing to use some jump rings that I've closed. And if you need more instruction on opening and closing jump rings, you can go to beadshop.com. In our free tips and techniques section, you can get a very thorough review of that technique. You can also use these sliders that we sell on beadshop.com as well. We only have them in silver tone, not gold tone. And so you want to close your jump rings, or detach your project from your board and slide them on. Don't try to put them on around your project. It's just much easier to slide them on like a bead. And so I have my 3 thick tails coming out of either side, and I've separated the colors so that 3 different colors are on both sides. And then I have my tough cord 1 coming down. And so I'm going to bring it up and around the middle for a few wraps, just to get everything in place. And then with the side cords, I like to take them and cut them so that they're even. And then I make sort of needles out of Scotch tape for them, just to keep them together, and it makes it easier to work with if you have a sort of faux needle. So you're not going to be going through any beads with these, it's just to help keep everything in place. So just wrap some tape around, doesn't have to be perfect. And then you'll do the same thing with your other side. And this, don't include your tough cord strings in this, just the seal-on. So now, you're doing a very similar concept as the regular ladder bracelet when you have beads, except you're just not putting in beads. So I'm taking my right tail, I'm going to feed it under and through, and then my left tail is coming underneath that tail now. And I'm going to take that and feed that part under and through, and then make sure your skinny tough cord tails are pulled out and that it's pushed up against your slider beads. And then you're going to do the same thing. Start with your right tail, under and through, make sure it goes underneath your left tail, and then take your left tail and feed it under and through, and then you tighten it up and pull your cords. So you can see that you've already kind of started a braid there. So don't get too upset if it's a little loose at first. You tighten as you go, and now I'm going to take my beeswax to kind of make faux needles at the ends of the cords, because it's too much going on to add needles to the equation. And a little bit of beeswax works just fine. And then I'm going to come in and just angle cut your cord with your very sharp pliers to get a nice angle on that. Just helps speed through the beads a little bit better. Okay. So I've started my ladder stitch already. I'm going to go once more just to get it aligned underneath the braid a little bit better. So bring it around the core cables. And I'm going to start with the garnet. All of these supplies you see used in this bracelet are for sale on beadshop.com. And then feed it back through the opposite side. Like so. Just be patient, especially with gemstones and pearls. Sometimes the holes, they aren't incredibly consistent, so you'll just need to work with it. Okay, so I have that one in place. I'm going to bring my tails around once, each side of the leather. Pull them up. Then I'm going to take these. Like I said before, don't worry about everything being pulled taut quite yet. I'm going to take my left in between the leather, and under, and then the right in between. Then you want to position your bead so that it's not popping out of the leather. And go back to the right. And so I like doing that twice in between each bead, but you can really do it as many times as you want until you get whatever look you're going for. And then sometimes pliers come in handy for when you're trying to tighten things up. Just make sure not to ding your leather. And then pull it. And your beads are going to pop in and out a little bit. When it's on, your beads will lay flat, and when it's off, you'll probably see that they're popping in and out a little bit, but it's obviously not a perfect look. You'll drive yourself crazy if you're trying to make it perfect. Pull it tight. And wrap it around the sides. Like I said, this part where I'm stitching the beads in is gone in. The technique is very thoroughly reviewed in our How to Make a Ladder Bracelet video, so if you're unfamiliar with it, I would suggest making a short bracelet before you try doing any of this part or the next part, because you'll get very frustrated if you haven't tried that technique at all when you start in on this project. Again, through that way. You just keep going and tightening up as you go. And the further you go, the easier it becomes to retroactively fix what you've done. And just keep adding beads in whatever pattern you want and braiding in between until you get to your next section. Once you have as much of the herringbone ladder done as you care to do, you'll silk wrap it just like before, and then cut all of the thick tails off. And if you still have enough tough cord to continue your ladder bracelet and finish it, that's great, but if you didn't cut enough tough cord, you can always add it in the silk wrap just as you did to the square knot. So the fifth and final stitch is our basic ladder bracelet, and I'm going to go over the basic technique pretty quickly, but if you need a more thorough review, please watch our How to Make a Ladder Bracelet video by clicking on the link. And so I did my silk wrap, and I have my sliders covering it, and I've cut away all the cords except for my tough cord in number 1. So I have the 2 tails coming out, and I'm going to bring them around and around. And then I like to taper into my pattern, so I'm going to put on a 4mm round first, like so, and that'll kind of lock your sliders into place also. Putting that in there gives it some shoulders. And then continue on, bringing your tails around your framing cords. Give you my coffee too. Okay. So now I'm going to add my next set of beads, and don't worry if it pops in and out at first. As you ladder down, it will get progressively tighter, and you just keep going. And you can see with this sample, I alternated back and forth with the 4mm round and the 2mm round, and it made for kind of a fun look. And then I'm just going to keep working my way down until I have the length I need and the look I'm going for. Rolling! So now I finished my ladder section, and I'm going to finish it, and I'm working with leather framing cord this time, and if you watch the video, I'm working with wax cotton and cords that you can just sew through the knot to secure them. And in working with the leather, I've found a slightly different way, and so you come to your end, and then you're going to kind of do the herringbone stitch with just your tough cord. And do that a few times, not so much that it's super obvious, but this also helps bring your project to a taper and just adds a little more reinforcement, because it would be heartbreaking for your bracelet to break after you put all this effort into it. So I am all about being a little overly secure with my finishing process. So now I have both cords coming out of the back. Then you just bring them both to one side and tie a double knot. You're going left over right. Pull it tight, but not so tight that your last bead is popping out. And then right over left. And so you can see the cords are a little crisscrossed, and now I'm going to remove the project from the design board by just sliding it off and then undoing the knotting at the end. Now I have all of your tails, all four, and you're going to tie an overhand knot with all four. And then you're going to tie it so that the knot is just above where you're doing your herringbone stitch to finish. Like so. And make sure that that last bead is not popping out. If it's popping out, you've done it too tightly. And then now to finish securing your tough cord tails, another double knot, which is left over right and right over left. And then I'm going to come in and add a dab of glue on the knot. And you don't want too much. You can have a little extra in there for some extra security, keeping that knot in place. And then to make it super secure, we're going to come in with our thread burner. And since this is a nylon cord, the thread burner singes it and kind of makes the nylon come into a little ball, so it's not going to so easily come unknotted if it gets the opportunity to do so. So it just really seals it. And then I like to have mine be extendable. So you tie another knot, make sure your button can fit through it, which it can, and then tie another knot. Again, make sure your button can fit through, which it can. And then come back in with your glue. Bring the tip into the knot. You don't want to slather the outside of the knot with glue because that's just not very attractive looking. Try to be discreet about your glue placement. And then allow that to set and dry. And that will keep that last knot from slipping out if you're wearing it on the last extension. And then once it's set, come in with your wire cutters and snip the tails. And then you have a beautiful bracelet ready to go.